How's it going, Bruno Boys Nation? We hope everyone enjoyed their Sunday watching the NFL, and we hope that all your fantasy football players got the job done and you have a great shot of winning in week one, depending on what happens on Monday Night Football. As you guys saw throughout the week, I went ahead and I gave you guys some hot takes on some different players around the NFL that I thought were going to be good fantasy options or guys that maybe were being overvalued this week. And what I want to do today is I want to go ahead and I want to talk to you guys about some guys I projected to do well that did well, and some guys that I projected not to do well that actually did well as some guys that I thought were going to stink that did stink. So basically, I like to call it my week one hot takes, hit and misses. And the first guy I want to talk about is at the quarterback position. That's Jimmy Garoppolo. I discussed with you guys how Garoppolo I thought had a good matchup. He torched the Cardinals twice last year. And you look at the numbers, 19 for 33, not great in terms of completion accuracy, but he had 259 yards. He had 2 touchdowns. He finished with 19.26 fantasy points in half PPR leagues. And that was good enough for his owners that plugged him in to give them a chance to win. The other thing with Garoppolo, too, is that he really had no receivers on the outside. Deebo Samuel ended up being inactive. Brandon Ayuk, the rookie, was inactive. And they were running out Kendrick Bourne and Dante Pettis throughout the afternoon. George Kittle got off to a good start early. Then he hurt the leg. And then the second half, he was basically a decoy, which meant Garoppolo didn't have many options to throw the football to. The 49ers tried to go run heavy. They were upset 24-20 by the Arizona Cardinals. And overall, definitely a guy that I hit on was Jimmy Garoppolo. Another guy at the quarterback position that I was fortunate enough to predict pretty much on the spot was Joe Burrow. I talked to you guys about how the Chargers were going to bring pressure. They were going to try to get to Burrow and make his NFL debut a little bit of a havoc. And that's exactly what happened early in the game. Los Angeles had 3 early sacks. Burrow was uncomfortable. He looked flustered at times. He finished 23 of 36, threw an interception, had 193 passing yards, where his best value came this week was on the ground. 46 rushing yards, scored a touchdown. Overall, 16.32 fantasy points. Burrow was just inside the top 20 at the position leading into the Monday games. Definitely thought he wasn't going to have a great performance in the opener, and that's exactly what happened. I will say this, though. Moving forward, give him a couple weeks, but Joe Burrow is going to have a fantasy impact. He was getting better as the game went on. He actually led the Bengals down the field to hit a game-winning field goal, but then Randy Bullock shanked it, and the Chargers ended up going 1-0 and getting the win in that one. Quarterback I completely swung and missed on, Aaron Rodgers, 32 of 44, 364 passing yards, 4 touchdown passes. In vintage Aaron Rodgers fashion, he torched the Minnesota Vikings. Looking at this matchup, I didn't like it on paper. The Vikings did have a couple injuries later in the week that impacted a few things in the secondary and in the defense. But safe to say that Rodgers does still have some stuff left in the tank. And that was a message right there to the ownership group and the general manager that drafted Jordan Love in the first round. Rodgers came out and said, hey, you know what? Love might be the Packers' guy down the road, but I still have a few years left. Moving on to the running back position, guys that we really did a good job of predicting was Nick Chubb. I talked to you guys about how game pace was going to determine Chubb's value, and we saw him have some early down work. He had a big run in the first quarter, finished with 10 rushes for 60 yards. He had 6 receiving yards on 1 total target. The problem was that Cleveland was down by so much. In the whole entire second half, they basically had to throw the football. Kareem Hunt, the other running back in Cleveland, is the better pass catcher, and he saw the lion's share of the opportunity and was in the game a lot more in the second half. He had the better performance. Chubb only had 5.1 fantasy points in half PPR leagues. It's probably going to be his lowest output of the season. I wouldn't hesitate to get him into your lineup in week number 2. Another guy that we said wasn't going to get much done in Detroit was Kerryon Johnson, and that was the case. Yes, he did get the start, but he finished with just 14 yards on 7 carries. He was outperformed by Adrian Peterson, who actually had I believe, 12 carries for over 90 yards, and DeAndre Swift, who was able to punch in a touchdown. Swift did drop a sure-handed, or I shouldn't say sure-handed, he dropped an easy game-winning touchdown pass late in the fourth quarter from Matthew Stafford. But you look at this Detroit Lions running back situation, Peterson now holds a little bit of value because he did pace the running backs. He does have that relationship with Darren Bevel that we talked about in our hot takes, and that's something that you need to consider moving forward. I wouldn't drop Kerryon Johnson just yet, but I would stash him, see how week 2, maybe week 3 plays out. And if you're not seeing any forward movement in terms of opportunity, go ahead and dump him and get yourself someone who has a lot more value that you could pick up on the waiver wire. Even in week 2, the more I think about it, if you are trying to get one of those diamonds in the roughs, like a Malcolm Brown or a Nyheim Hines, someone who had a good week, and the only guy you can drop is Kerryon Johnson, you should probably consider it. Some running backs that I missed on this week was Boston Scott, and that was probably the biggest miss of the week. When Miles Sanders got hurt, the Scott hype train went through the roof. I looked into it, did my homework on it, and I really thought that this was going to be a situation against the Washington football team that Scott was going to be able to produce. He got the early workload, but he wasn't really able to do much with it. He had just 34 yards on 9 carries. He saw 2 targets, caught both of those passes, 19 receiving yards. Definitely disappointed a lot of owners, especially since we had moved him all the way up into our top 20 running backs in all scoring formats for week 1. The problem with this game was the Philadelphia Eagles offensive line just tanked as the game went on. Carson Wentz had no time to throw the football. The Redskins, they won the battle at the line of scrimmage. They were able to stuff the run, and it was a huge turnaround. I think Washington scored 24 unanswered points in the second half to win the football game. You look at this game, you look at this matchup, and Scott definitely underperformed. Now we head into week 2. Miles Sanders might come back. You can't really hold your trust in Scott, even if he is considered the running back number 1 and Sanders is out. I personally, in PPR leagues that are deep, would keep him because I do think there still is standalone value. It just shows that he's not a running back that could handle that title of being the starter, and he does better when he's complementing a guy like Miles Sanders or someone who's a little bit more not athletic but versatile and a better downfield runner. Looking at the wide receivers, this one was just a complete swing and miss at the entire position. I had John Brown being a guy that I didn't think was going to produce this week. He goes out there, he scores 16 fantasy points, 6 receptions, 70 yards, 10 targets, scores a touchdown. That rapport that we saw in 2019 with Josh Allen was there. The Stephon Diggs acquisition didn't seem to really hurt his value. The Jets secondary has a lot to be desired, and the Bills and Josh Allen did pick it apart, especially early. So I want to see how Brown continues to fare moving forward, but he's definitely a guy that now, you look at things and you have yourself maybe a wide receiver number 3 flex play in 12-team leagues. Marquis Brown, another guy that I was unfortunately down on this week. I didn't like the matchup against the Browns. The Browns did have some injuries in the secondary that I didn't think was going to impact things as much as it actually did. Brown went for 5 receptions, 101 yards, had 6 targets. He had a big 47-yard play, I believe, early in the first quarter, which was about half those yards. But he also had 4 catches on the game that went for 13 or more receiving yards. It looks like Lamar Jackson and him seem to be on a better page than they were on last year, and it seems like he's getting some more over-the-middle targets, and it's not as much of a boom and bust as we saw in 2019 with the deep ball. So that's good news for Brown's owners. And, if he continues to have this type of production, you factor in some big plays, you factor in a touchdown here and there, now all of a sudden his value is a lot higher than what we had him at going into the season. So definitely good news for Brown owners, but a guy that I missed on this week. Michael Gallup, another guy, he had just 6.5 fantasy points in half-point PPR leagues, 5 targets, 50 receiving yards, 3 receptions. He actually was 3rd in the target chain behind Amari Cooper and CeeDee Lamb. Lamb had just 1 more target than him. the other thing, too, is that if you look at this game, Gallup caught a 40-plus yard late, and then he got called up for an offensive pass interference penalty, which I did not think was an OPI. And that would have, all of a sudden jumped him into a double-digit fantasy performance. And now he's a guy that I'm telling you I hit on. So, one play here and there could be the difference of a big week. And this game just didn't really pan out how we thought it. We thought it was going to be fast-paced. We thought there was going to be a lot of points, but the Rams really controlled the clock. The Cowboys couldn't stop them throughout the day, and it led to the Cowboys' offense really not being able to get into any type of flow. The last guy at the wide receiver position that wasn't horrible. He had 7.5 fantasy points, but I thought he was going to do a lot better for you, especially with Kenny Golladay being out, was Marvin Jones. 55 receiving yards, 4 catches, 8 targets, averaged almost 14 yards per catch. But the problem was that he saw tight cover throughout the day. The focus was on him because Golladay was out, and he wasn't able to get much separation. Tight end position definitely was a win for our hot takes in week 1. We had Jared Cook said he was going to be a double-digit fantasy performer, and he went for 10.5 fantasy points, 5 catches, 80 yards, 7 targets. He was definitely Drew Brees' main target down the field. You factor in a touchdown, now all of a sudden he's a top 3 tight end, but he did finish inside the top 10 as we projected. And the other guy we thought he wasn't going to have a good game, and that was Rob Gronkowski in his debut, and that was exactly what happened. 2 catches, 11 yards on 3 targets. Gronk looked slow. He wasn't on the field a ton. I'm not saying that he doesn't have any rest of season value because he does need to get into full game shape and be able to play at that game speed again after his retirement. But this is a stash. You have to make sure that you have the roster space. It might not be until the middle of the season when you really see that true value coming from Gronk. And it's not going to be what fantasy owners are used to in the past because he is older and his role is definitely going to be a lot different in Tampa than it was in New England. But definitely a guy that didn't get it done this week as we projected. And the last but not least, the kickers, Young Ho Koo, talked about how he's got a big leg, hit 2 40-yard field goal attempts, finished with 9 fantasy points, which was good enough to make him on our hit our hit list. You look at Koo, and he probably would have had a few more kicking chances, but the Falcons did play catch-up most of the second half, and that meant that they had to go for it on 4th down a few times where it was in field goal range. A guy I missed on was Matthew Prater. I didn't like the matchup against the Bears, but he benefited from the Lions being able to move the football and not punching it into the end zone early in the first half. Kicked a couple field goals in that first half. Finished 3 of 4 on field goal attempts. Had 2 extra points, 11 fantasy points. Top 5 kicker this week heading into Monday, and someone that it made me look bad. But guys, 7 hits, 7 misses. We have Big Ben going tonight. Hopefully he gets it done as I projected, and I'm over 500 in week 1. I'm really looking forward to getting back after it week 2, giving you some additional hot takes, helping you guys, learn a little bit more about some fantasy players that you're not 100% sure about, help you guys get that perfect lineup and hit the waiver wire. Make sure you guys head over to brunoboys.net. Check out all of the different articles we have throughout the week. I know Brad Berryman, our waiver wire guru, just put out his 9 early waiver wire ads for week 2. A lot of good guys for you guys to go put a waiver claim on. And other than that, best of luck if you need some fantasy points to win a matchup this week, and we'll see you throughout week 2.